Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. We're just a handful of days away until another unofficial beginning of summer. Memorial Day is a week from today as we get set to usher in my favorite time of the year. But that's up there with me delivering another jam-packed, rapid-fire take on everything that's happening in sports, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first-timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And boy, do I have a podcast that's chock full of sports talk. So let's get right at it. And first up, right out of the gate, I'm sure at around 10:30 p.m. Eastern time last night, after what took place at Madison Square Garden about 4.5 hours earlier, and then to see what happened in the Rocky Mountains there in Denver, where the defending champs go bye-bye, as well as a huge market and a great story as the New York Knicks also exit stage left of the NBA playoffs. Adam Silver and the powers that be had to be sick to their stomachs, choking up on their kale salads and their Sauvignon Blanc, because when we now look at the Final Four of the NBA as the conference finals are set, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago where New York and Boston and Denver, maybe OKC, but I would think Denver and Dallas, considering Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic to go up against the defending champs, that's a Final Four that they most definitely would have settled on. Now, of course, with no LeBron, no Steph Curry, of course, they would have taken the Lakers or the Golden State Warriors, either one of those two teams in a Final Four to go along with the Denver Nuggets. But as it was, we probably thought that that was going to be the Final Four. And boy, were we fooled going into yesterday's Game 7s. And it's a shame because both of them, obviously very shocking. One, for a particular reason where the Nuggets had a 15-point lead and led by 20 in the second half. And I'm going to start there because the other game was pretty much a blowout from the start. And when you're going to shoot 67% the way the Pacers did, there's no way they could have lost that game. And if they did, that would have been an embarrassment to them. But the nightcap was the one that had everybody just shocked. The Nuggets got out to a big lead, and again, that 15-point lead to where they held the Minnesota Timberwolves to 38 first-half points. And you're thinking to yourself, based on what we saw Friday night to where they got blown out by 45 points, weren't in the game, and I thought going into yesterday's game that that was a good sign for the Nuggets because it wasn't as if they lost a nail-biter, a game that they let slip away on the road where they could have closed out the T-Wolves in their building. And because of that, knowing that they were out of the game pretty much from the start then on Friday night, or was it Thursday, excuse me, and having to regroup, couple days off, an extra day heading into Game 7 yesterday, that to me, I thought the Nuggets were just going to run away with it, win a Game 7. The T-Wolves would have had to go back to the drawing board, although it's been a great year overall. But as it was, even with them down at the half and only scoring 38 points from pretty much the first minute of the third quarter to about the first minute of the fourth quarter, the Nuggets go on a 32-9 run and pretty much had the game in hand. And the one thing, let me talk about Minnesota first before I get to Denver, because I think this is more, give credit to the Timberwolves. 100%. You cannot discount what they did here. And this is without the dominant performance that we've seen offensively from their superstar guard, Anthony Edwards. He shot 6 for 24 in the game, but he made plays, was great defensively, was able to control Jamal Murray, had a big first half in Game 7. And for guys like Karl Anthony Towns, who stepped up big time with a 23-12 performance, as well as getting the dunk at 93-88 to seal the game away. Rudy Gobert even chipped in offensively with 8 of his 13 points there in the second half, including that crazy shot that he made. And when you knew he made that shot, that turnaround where it looked like it was elbows and knees, and for him to make a shot like that, you knew that the Timberwolves were going to win this game because, as we all know, he is far from an offensive prowess despite the fact of his height and length. And for the Timberwolves, again, give them credit. Their first conference championship, or conference final, I should say, since 2004, on the day that Kevin Garnett, he of Minnesota Timberwolves fame from yesteryear, and the last time that a team made it to a conference final, he was a part of, where he turned 48 yesterday. And for the Timberwolves, give it up. Down by 15, coming back the way they did and salting the game away there late, where they had a 10-point lead and they ended up winning 98-90. Kudos to the coaching staff, Chris Finch. Kudos to what they were able to do there to slow down Nikola Jokic, who, although he had 34 points in the game, but he did shoot 28 attempts. And for him and Jamal Murray, who also had a big-time effort there offensively, more so in the first half, like I mentioned. But for the Timberwolves, give them all the credit in the world. But there is a flip side to that, and this is where I'm going to have to pound on a couple of guys, because for Jokic as well as Murray and what they did there last night in Game 7, where was Michael Porter Jr.? Where was Aaron Gordon? And not even just last night. Michael Porter Jr., I saw that stat where in the final 4 games of the series, what did he have, 28 total points? This is a guy that we know when he's on his game, you could think that he's an all-NBA player. Now, that's not to say he is, but with also his height at 6'10", being able to shoot the three, fill the lane, a guy that, when he is right, is a top-flight player. And Aaron Gordon, we know what the type of player he is, but these are guys that float in and out of games. And when you're not getting contributions from those guys, because the Kentavious Caldwell-Popes, he's going to give you more defense. Yeah, he can make a shot or two, but he's not going to put up big offensive numbers. And Christian Brown coming off the bench, I understand he adds a little bit of a spark, but he's also a guy that you're not going to depend on to fill up the stat sheet as far as points are concerned. But for Michael Porter Jr., let me say that again, and Aaron Gordon, these guys were invisible here, especially in a Game 7 where you thought that they were going to rise to the occasion, being in the friendly confines of the Ball Arena, Mile High, the altitude, etc. But their Mile High just shrunk and went out the window and off into the spring and summer on vacation, because this was an inexcusable performance for both of those guys. And more so Porter Jr. than Aaron Gordon. But both of those guys are at fault here for not raising their game in a Game 7, knowing that they won a title last year and knowing that they needed their contributions in order for them to get back to a conference final. And this is now the 5th year in a row that the defending NBA champ has not gotten past the conference semis. So you want to call it parity? You want to just say that maybe they, I don't want to say mailed it in. I won't go as far as saying that. But this is a Game 7. You've been there before. You know what it takes to raise your level, and those two guys did not. Where Jokic, I understand a lot of volume when it comes to his shot attempts, and Murray, who came out like gangbusters, but then give it up for Anthony Edwards and what he did there in the second half to do his best to contain, make plays offensively, whether it's getting his teammates involved or trying to slow down Murray. And here they are. The T-Wolves now have the home court in the next round against the Dallas Mavericks, and we saw what the Mavericks did, beating the Oklahoma City Thunder, which I'll get to that in a minute. I want to just make it more about this game and then talk about the Knicks and then go backwards from there. But for the T-Wolves, how much more can I give them credit and praise them for what they were able to do? They had a 2-0 series lead, and then Denver won the next 3 games after that, knowing that they went home to a game number 6 in their building where the Nuggets won those 2 middle games to get themselves back in the series. But they went going away, as I mentioned, 115-70, which I don't know if that's more on Minnesota or if that's more on Denver for just being a no-show. I mean, seriously, 115-70 in a game where you could have closed out the T-Wolves and not be in the scenario where you had to play a Game 7 in your building. But all the kudos goes to them, and let's see what they're going to do here. Now, a lot of people will think that they'll come out of the Western Conference based on these final 2 games, but that's going to be a formidable, and I would think that's going to be a long series, and of course I'll get to that in a moment. Now let me get to the earlier game with the Knicks, and we saw what happened there Friday night where the Pacers pretty much led from in front throughout the whole night, And the Knicks, we understand that they were, no pun intended, nicked up there. No OG Anunoby. Josh Hart, who suffered an abdominal strain and was compromised there in Game 6 against the Pacers. So you knew the Knicks were pretty much crawling to the finish line as you get to a Game 7 yesterday. And all I can say is this. I mentioned this not at the very top, but when I talked about the Pacers there about 7-8 minutes ago, how they shot, for the most part, it seemed like they shot 70% for the whole game, and in closing, 67% was the official stat. The NBA playoff record for shooting percentage in a playoff game. And if a team is going to shoot lights out like that, the opposing team has no shot unless they're going to shoot anything close to what the Pacers did. And with the Knicks, as you saw there, OG Anunoby gave it a go, made a bucket, but after, not even 5 minutes in the game, had to sit the rest of the game. Josh Hart, who was game in his own right and contributed as much as he could, got a rousing ovation as he fouled out there late in the fourth quarter. And then late in the third quarter, where Tyrese Halliburton went for a layup and Jalen Brunson went for the swipe to try to get a strip. His hand was fractured in doing so, and he was out late part of the third quarter, although he came back in, I believe, just for another minute, but then left, went into the locker room, and then early fourth quarter, the news came down that he fractured his hand. He was done for the game. And at that point, you just knew that the game was over, despite the fact that the Knicks did make an early run there in the early part of the second half after the Pacers jumped out to a 15-point halftime lead. And then the Knicks kept it close. I believe they got as close as 6 at one point there in the third quarter. But then once Brunson went out, and it was just a slow death. And that's the one thing about Game 7s, and that's the one thing about those type of games, because I had to deal with that last year where Jason Tatum turned his ankle on pretty much their opening possession and had to watch the Heat slowly but surely, death by 1,000 paper cuts, just beat the Celtics, and they had no shot in the game. And I get it. You'd rather lose like that than to lose a heartbreaker at the buzzer or have a team come back from a big deficit, a la what we saw there with Minnesota and Denver last night. But that was just an execution of a slow death there yesterday at Madison Square Garden with all the celebrities there and the Pacers shooting the lights out of the ball and the Knicks were running on fumes. You just knew that by watching that, especially as you got deeper into the third quarter and then early fourth quarter when the Pacers just kept piling it on, and you just had to stomach that. You had to watch it, and that was just a tough optic for any Knicks fan to absorb there. And all you could say is tip your hat to the Pacers for shooting 67%. And to think, I thought the Pacers had no shot to win the game yesterday, considering what we saw. Granted, games 1 and 2, they were in the series, or in those games, and had a shot more so game 1 than game 2 to win. And then you saw what happened there in game 5 as the Knicks blew their doors off. But yesterday, what could you say? When you're going to shoot lights out like that, that's going to be an insurmountable task for a Knicks team who have pieced this team together with Scotch tape, bubblegum, and spit to get through a Game 7. As we saw, they fell up way short. And now the Pacers move on, and as I mentioned at the very top, Adam Silver, he could be smiling from ear to ear today and say, hey, we're going to have a competitive Eastern Conference Final as well as a Western Conference Final, but he cannot be happy with what he saw there yesterday, because now there is a possibility, and I don't want to say it's slim because who knows, with the way these playoffs have gone, anything could happen, but could you imagine when it's all said and done, you're going to have an Indiana Pacer, Minnesota Timberwolves NBA Final? Who's going to watch? Which now sets the stage here in this regard. To me, they have to have Boston win the Eastern Conference, because if Indiana wins, it will be an absolute nightmare. And I get it if you have Dallas come out, and I'm sure that the NBA suits, they have their fingers crossed to have Kyrie and Luka come out of the West. And I understand Minnesota's a great story because of what they've been able to build here over the last couple of years, and now with Anthony Edwards shining bright to go along with Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Jalen McDaniels, etc. But because Midwest, and I get it that they have not made it to an NBA final in the franchise's history, and this is only their second conference final, and I know that it's something different and it's new, and the casual sports fan can maybe rally around that to watch, but really, that is not going to be a sexy matchup. Whether it's Minnesota-Boston would be good, But if it's Minnesota, Indiana, I don't want to hear it. Even the casual sports fan, although they may be geeked up for it for maybe games 1 or 2, but after that, they may just disappear and say, I'm not interested. So Boston has to make it to this final. If it's Boston-Dallas, I would think that they'd want that first, only because you have the storylines with Kyrie going back to Boston, although we've seen that movie before, but now it's in a championship setting. So that's number 1, and then of course it's Luka's first NBA Finals, so I'm sure a lot of people will gravitate to that. Not much so the head coach with Jason Kidd, although he did win the Mavericks' only NBA championship 13 years ago, so that's another storyline if you want to add that in. And then the Celtics trying to get over the hump, as we all know, throughout this run here with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, how many conference finals they made. Of course, they made it to the NBA Finals 2 years ago, we know. But now it's time for them to see if they could get to the mountaintop. So to me, the Celtics have to get there. Indiana, they're playing with house money here. And think about this. You know me, throwing cold water. If Giannis was healthy and if Damian Lillard was healthy, and I understand there are what-ifs and you can't play that game, but would they really be here at this point? And we could say the same here if Jalen Brunson was healthy, and even if they had OG Anunoby, forget about Julius Randle or even Mitchell Robinson for that matter, I get it. But they're a 6 seed, and they were 6 seed for a reason. Now they have talent and they could score, and their head coach, Rick Carlisle, is one where I get it. If they go to an NBA final, he was the one that won them, the Dallas Mavericks, a championship back in 2011. So if it's Indiana-Dallas, maybe you have an interesting storyline there. But going back to the Pacers and the Celtics have to win this thing. And I guess maybe it's now a good segue for me to talk about these series in earnest. As for the Celtics, I would think this would be a 6-game series. Could it go 7? I think it could. Now, the underlying factor of this series is the health of Kristaps Porzingis. Because I think whatever he's going to be able to do here, if it was against the Knicks, I don't think they would need him. Because the Knicks don't have a lot of size other than Isaiah Hartenstein, who did not play well yesterday in the game. But he's a guy that you'd have to account for at least. But with no OG and obviously no Randle, the Knicks don't really have a lot of size up front. So you could have put Kristaps on the side to the NBA final. But now you have a scenario where I'm surely going to ramp up his workload, and hopefully he comes back at some point in this series. I would think maybe we'll see him later on, maybe as early as game 3. I don't know for sure, but they're going to need him because with Miles Turner and with their team, the way they're built and constructed, I would think that having Porzingis in the lineup is going to be more imperative to at least get some reps to go up against that front court. And not that they have a dominant front court by any stretch, but Miles Turner in particular, I get it. You can put Al Horford out there, but you can't have Al Horford out there anything north of 30 minutes. And that's even a stretch too, because he's a guy that's supposed to come off the bench to relieve Kristaps. And as it is, you're going to have to get a lot out of Al Horford just to chase Miles Turner around the court, even though he will probably be on the perimeter a lot. But of course, he could be down low. So you have that to account for if you're the Celtics. But I could see this being a 6-game series. If it's anything more, would I be shocked? I can't say that. But the Celtics have to take advantage of just making sure they defend well. And as you saw here over the course of the last couple of games, TJ McConnell, he's a pain in the butt, as we've seen. Andrew Nembhard is a resourceful player. Tyrese Halliburton, who chirps a little bit too much for my liking, because he's a guy that I don't even know if he made it as far as a third-team All-NBA player. He could be second team for all I know. And he's a very good player. And I get it. And he's certainly earned his right as being one of the top players in the league. But this is really first go-around in the NBA playoffs. And I get it. You can say, well, he's having fun. He's enjoying the moment. But hopefully the Celtics will shut up his mouth, because you know he's going to be chirping and being that front-running type player, because I don't see him chirping when they're down the way they were early part of the series against the Knicks. So let's see what's going to happen there. But I would think that the Celtics, with their rest, home court doesn't mean anything if you ask me, because the Celtics, they can spit the bit in these, especially game 2s, as we saw against the Miami Heat and the Cavaliers. But I would think it's going to be too much Jason Tatum, too much Jaylen Brown. Then you also have to wonder whether or not who's going to be able to step up there. Whether Drew Holiday, you feel that he's going to do his best to slow down Tyrese Halliburton there in the backcourt. And we're going to see what's going to happen with Porzingis, but I would think that this could be minimum a 6-game series, and I'm going to pick the Celtics in 6. Could it go 7? I think it could. I hope it doesn't. But to me, it's going to be all contingent on the Celtic defense because they're going to have to slow down this Pacer offense. And to me, even though Knicks-Celtics would have been the sexy matchup by far, but that would have been a 5-game series because you wouldn't have had Brunson. The Knicks, like I said, they're literally running on fumes. And this would have been a series that, yes, New York versus Boston, Spike Lee and everybody would have been showing up for games 3 and games 4. And I would have given the Knicks at least one game based on their grit, their guts, etc. But who's really left on this Knicks team that you would have any trust in to score? Not Dante DiVincenzo or Alec Burks, and give them credit for trying to keep the Knicks in the game there, with DiVincenzo scoring 39 and Alec Burks pretty much averaging a point a minute when he played in the game. But that would have been just I don't want to say a flat-out embarrassment. That's way too strong because we would not know how these games would have played out. But the Knicks would have been severely undermanned, and there would have been a heavy underdog going into the series. So maybe it's best that Indiana does show up here. So we'll get to see. But I think, and I'm not saying this from a Celtic bias standpoint, but the Celtics are the better team. Now, Indiana's probably going to give them a run for their money, and this is where the Celtics, I feel they need to take care of home court because I can see them winning a game in Indiana, and I can certainly see the Pacers winning a game in Boston. But let's see them get out of the gate. You would think, like I said, well-rested, flying high, and to try to slow down that Pacer team. To me, the Celtic defense is going to be a huge storyline heading into these first 2 games of the series. Because as we've seen before, whether it's in the Miami series, even Cleveland, when their defensive performance steps up, that's when they win games. And give credit to Rick Carlisle and the adjustments that he made in the final 2 games against the Knicks, trying to do everything and anything he can to slow down Jalen Brunson. And Brunson did not have a good game even prior to him leaving with the fractured hand. And if they're going to shoot the lights out like they did, not to say that that's going to happen, but that's also a testament to how prepared they were going into that game. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a very good series. I think it's going to be a lot better than Knicks and Celtics would have been. So we shall see game 1 tomorrow night there in Boston. And then as far as the Western Conference, now Dallas, they beat OKC. And Oklahoma City, this is one thing that you need to know here about the Thunder. Maybe the spotlight was too big. They also had a big lead there in the game 6 where they blew a 17-point second half lead. And for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who had a big game in his own right, but the supporting cast for the Dallas Mavericks were the saving grace in them advancing to a conference final. Whether your name is Derek Lively, whether your name is Derek Jones Jr., who had a big performance and added 20 points in a game number 6. And that's the thing. PJ Washington with those clutch free throws there at the end of the game. And Kyrie, who had 23 points, but he had 22 shot attempts. So although Kyrie did make some plays, but was not efficient as far as his shooting percentage goes, and even with Luka Doncic with a triple-double again to close out the series, to me, Oklahoma City Thunder, this is the main ingredient that, to me, I think that they need going into next year. They need a guy, and I don't want to just say this guy in particular, but they need a veteran presence, a guy who's won a championship and knows what it takes to win. The first guy that came off the top of my head was someone like PJ Tucker. Now, I get it. PJ Tucker is more of a role guy. He's a glue guy. And to me, that's what they need. I would think that they would also need another scorer to complement Shai Gilgeous-Alexander because as we've seen throughout the last couple of games, their offense floats in and out. And they don't have really another bona fide second banana on their team to carry them to heights unknown, especially for a young Thunder team. So whomever that second guy is, who has championship experience, knows what it takes to win, that's the guy they need. Because the Lou Dorts of the world, the Josh Giddey's, who obviously has fallen off of a map here. A lot of people thought that he's a future all-star and a guy that could really be a second or third string, not player, but a third guy in the wheel when it comes to them contributing to the team. But Josh Giddey was another guy that was off in the wilderness, nowhere to be found, not being a guy as a main contributor offensively to this team. And we could talk about the brilliance of SGA, and rightfully so, but to me, he needs another guy there to help carry the load, to help be that glue, to put that team, not necessarily on his shoulders, but to carry that team through a fire where they even the series. Remember, they were down 2-1. They tied the series, which was a statement game for me, but then they came up small in game 5 in their building, and then game number 6, where they had a double-digit lead, and I get it, double-digit leads in the NBA, especially when you're talking 15, 17, 20, they might as well be 4-point leads, because we've seen it time after time, and we just talked about it here, whether it was now in this series with OKC and Dallas or Minnesota and Denver, these leads shrivel up with the quickness. So the Thunder, we could talk about how great of a season they had, 1 seed, young team on the come up, and they are. They have draft picks aplenty. They have a young core, and maybe they could use one of those draft picks to bring back a guy that could lead them to the promised land, because they're going to need a guy like that, as I mentioned, in order for them to get to that level. It can't be all on SGA, and they're going to need more contributions from a guy who is going to be steady, if not spectacular, in that role as a number 2 in that lineup. Because what we've seen here, the Chet Holmgrens of the world, yes, they can make their marks and have big games, but if they're not going to be able to deliver in crunch time, then you need to bring in a guy that's going to do so. So that's what I have with the NBA. Oh, as a matter of fact, with the Dallas and Minnesota series, to me, this is going to be a scenario similar to what we saw with OKC and Dallas. Now, Luka, he's also being put together with duct tape and trying to find a way to just get to the finish line of these games. Kyrie, now we could talk about how Minnesota played here in these final 2 games. And I know it's going to be tough. Young team, maybe they've looked at this as a stepping stone, winning in Denver, beating the defending champs. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick Minnesota here, and rightfully so. Why not? But Dallas seems to be together here. I just mentioned the Derek Lively's of the world, the Daniel Gaffords, the PJ Washingtons, the Derek Jones Jr.'s. And based on what they've done here, now granted, they've beaten OKC and a Clipper team who you can't fully trust, whether the guys are in the lineup, James Harden, Paul George, or out of the lineup, Kawhi Leonard. But something is telling me that although the T-Wolves now are on that magic carpet ride themselves, being in a conference final and also being a team that has been a top 2, top 3 team in the conference throughout the whole year, but Dallas has a little magic dust too. Something tells me the Mavericks are going to win this series based on their supporting cast. And we don't know what's going to happen with Karl-Anthony Towns. We don't know what's going to happen here with Rudy Gobert. And I would think if they're going to play defense the way they did in that second half yesterday, as well as early on in that series against the Nuggets, then chances are they're going to get to an NBA final. Because think about it, even with the way Anthony Edwards shot yesterday, they still won a Game 7 on the road. And based on that, you could say, well, that's why they could be the favorite to win this series, and they are the favorites to come out of the West. But I don't know. I'm sure Kyrie, and there's a guy who has played in big games, who has made big shots, and has won an NBA championship. And I'm sure, I don't know if he'd admit this, but I'm sure there is something burning inside Kyrie right now, considering everything that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years. His exit from Boston, everything that had happened in Brooklyn, to him being traded to Dallas, and now that he's here, as he said, has peace in his life, has that stability, and knowing that he doesn't have to carry the complete load, despite the fact that Luka has been nothing but grateful to have Kyrie on his team. And Kyrie knows his way around these big moments. Will he have that here over the course of 5, 6, or 7 games against the T-Wolves? I think he will. I'm going to say Mavs in 7. I said Mavs in 7 in the previous series against OKC, and I guess I'm not jumping off that bandwagon. So I'm going to say Luka and Kyrie make it to a final for the first time in 13 years. First time for Luka, of course, but Kyrie, as we know, back in 2016 with Cleveland. as the NBA playoffs continue to march along here. And I think I mentioned the other day on Thursday's pod, Mike Budenholzer gets the Suns coaching job, where, strange as that is, he was the one in Milwaukee who beat the Suns in 2021 to win the title. So I just wanted to throw that back out. If I didn't, I think I did mention that then, but I'll mention it now. 5-year deal for him. And he even said that he's over the moon having this team, but did he fail to think that he does not have a bench? They're capped out, or really in cap hell, considering you have 3 players that are hamstringing the luxury tax and the salary cap for the Suns. So kudos to him, and he deserves another shot, and he shouldn't have been fired in the first place, but I just wanted to throw that out there as we move it along. Now, as I spend a half hour talking NBA, I got a lot of other things to get to, and I'm going to get to the NHL right now because the conference finals are on deck. Well, not just yet, because you still have a Game 7 tonight with Edmonton and Vancouver, and I'll get to them in a minute. The Rangers, I'll start with the East, because the Rangers and Panthers will link up there Wednesday night, Game 1, Madison Square Garden. Rangers and Hurricanes there on Thursday night, where the Hurricanes were in control, in command, had a 3-1 lead going into the third period, and then we could call this the Chris Kreider game, because then he had a natural hat trick, cut it to 3-2, tied the game at 3-3, made it 4-3, and they had another goal there late. And the Rangers, who were looking at a Game 7 in their building, had a 3-0 series lead, looking at possibly a 3-3 series even going back to the Garden there, which would have been Saturday night, and Chris Kreider bailed them out big time. And the Hurricanes, what could you say? Wilted, shrunk, big spot, a team that you would think with their 4 lines and great defensive strategies, etc. When you have a loaded team the way the Rangers do, and at any given moment, those players could go off. Whether your name is Artemi Panarin, I'll even give Alexis Lafreniere some credit there, because he's a guy that, former number 1 overall pick, has had his moments here in this postseason. Obviously, Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, those guys could go off at any moment. They're game wreckers. And Chris Kreider is a guy that wrecked the game there when they absolutely needed it, and they were able to close out the Hurricanes in 6 and move on to a conference finals second time in 3 years. And if you're a Hurricane fan, you got to be sick, because that should have gone 7 games. You should have been able to salt that game away. You had a 2-goal lead. I get it. Anything happens in hockey, bounce of a puck, etc. But if you're a team that was just 3 points behind the Rangers overall in the not only division, but in the conference, you got to find a way to win that game. You weren't an 8th seed. You weren't a team that were fumbling, bumbling, and stumbling. You had all the momentum in the world and the home crowd behind you, and you spit the bit. That's all there is to it. So now the Hurricanes got to lick their wounds and see what they could do to get themselves back, but they have to worry about that the rest of the spring and summer. So the Rangers are standing tall, awaiting the Florida Panthers, who, let's face it, if you're a Bruin fan, I'm sure you have nightmares dating back to last year in the opening round and now this round, where, think about this. After winning Game 1 in the opening round last year to the Florida Panthers, if I would have told you that you would have lost that series being up 3-1, but then subsequently lose Games 2, Games 5, and Game 7 in your building to lose that series, you would have thought I was high. So now let's fast forward a year later. The home ice belongs to the Panthers. So now you have Games 3, 4, and 6 where the Bruins are trying to defend their home ice. And what happens? The Panthers win those games to win a series. And what we've seen throughout the course of these Stanley Cup playoffs, so many of these games have come down to the third period, where games were closed out in literally the final seconds. I mean, think about this. You had Game 5 just in the Edmonton-Vancouver series, where Edmonton scored a goal with, 33 seconds to go left in the period. And then here in Game 6, after the score being 1-1, the Panthers scored with 1:33 to go, thanks to Gustav Forsling. And the Panthers were able to prevail and go back home, winners of another series, beating the Bruins again back-to-back years, and set up a date with the Rangers this coming Wednesday. And we've seen a lot of these teams win these games late with either overtime goals, as we've seen, or late goals in the final seconds, or even the final minute and a half of these games, even leading into overtime. and a crushing defeat for the Bruins. And we can understand not having their captain for a lot of that, especially in this series. And the Panthers, they certainly have what it takes, knowing that they went to a cup final last year, and now they get back to a conference final. And I could talk about this as we preview the Rangers and the Panthers. This, I believe, is going to be a wild series because the Panthers can match up with the Ranger firepower. They can match up with their front lines. They can match up with their goal scoring. They can even match up defensive with their Adam Fox on the Rangers and then Aaron Ekblad for the Panthers. The one advantage that the Rangers do have is in net. And I have to give credit to Sergei Bobrovsky. I've got on him more so not in the past year and a half, but prior to that, a guy that you can never trust, a guy that always seems to fold in huge spots. But between last year and then so far what we've seen to this point, the guy's been money. But he would still bother me against a team that can score. And we can look at the opening round against the Lightning because they also have a bunch of players there. A guy who's going to be up for the MVP and one Nikita Kucherov. They also have Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, so they're a little bit long in the tooth. But you understand that they do have a very good offensive team. Not so the Bruins, even though they do have a couple of big goal scorers. But the thing that would worry me if I'm a Panther fan is will Bobrovsky have those moments where he's going to end up leaving some label readers go right past them and into the net. That remains to be seen. But even with that, I know it's going to be tough to pick, and everybody's going to look at me as an anti-Ranger pick. The Panthers could win a Game 7 in their building. I think they could. I see Panthers at 6, although I can see the Rangers winning in 6. This is really a tough call because I think this is going to be a matchup that the Rangers will relish, the Rangers will obviously look forward to, but I think these teams are even other besides the goaltending because you have to give the edge to Igor Shesterkin. But the Panthers do have a little magic, and so do the Rangers for that matter. But the Rangers have been playing from in front throughout this entire postseason, and same for the Panthers as well. I don't know, something tells me the Panthers, they just have a little bit more magic than the Rangers do. Now, to get back to a cup for the second year in a row, not easy. Maybe I'm going to put a reverse jinx. This is tough. I've waffled back and forth on this all day yesterday, watching the NBA games back and forth. I didn't even know who to pick. And I know my gut is saying, pick the Rangers. You know what? I'm going to say Rangers in 6. I think the Panthers can win, though. I think the Panthers can win this series either in 6 or 7. But I'm going to say Rangers in 6. Yes, they have magic. Yes, they've been the best team throughout not only the regular season, but so far in this postseason, although they had a couple of hiccups there with Carolina. So I'm going to say the Rangers in 6, although I'm rooting hard for the Panthers to the chagrin of my good friend John Irving because I know he can't stand the Panthers. And he hates the Rangers too, but I just had to throw that in there. And then as far as the Western Conference, Dallas, who had done it the hard way. Now, they had that 3-1 lead, winning the 2 games in Colorado before losing the Game 5, as we know. And even with them losing Valerie Nestrushin, the Avalanche that was another big loss going into the NHL Players Assistance Program, which in all intents and purposes, it's encompassing whether it's violating the drug policy, gambling, domestic issues, etc. So he's on the show for 6 months. I didn't mention that on Thursday's podcast, so that's my error there. But for the Avalanche, in their building for a Game 6, where the Stars actually could have won in the first overtime where Matthew Shane was involved. Goalie interference, the goal was disallowed there. And I'm sure a lot of Bruin fans, when they look at what happened there against the Panthers with the goal by Sam Bennett, I'm sure that they were up in arms over that. But then Matthew Shane in the second overtime gets the winner as the Stars punch their ticket to the Western Conference Finals again. And the Stars, similar to the Rangers, top seed out west, front runners throughout the postseason here so far, although they were down 0-2 to the Vegas Golden Knights, as we know, in the opening series. But now the Stars await to see what's going to happen with the Edmonton Oilers and Vancouver Canucks tonight. And the theme is which Edmonton Oilers team is going to show up. Now, we saw what happened there, as I mentioned, at the end of Game 5, where they gave up a goal with 33 seconds to go. and lose a crusher, having to go back to Edmonton to see if they could equal the series, and they sure do so. When the game was tied at 1, that's when the Oilers took over, 4 unanswered goals. They win 5-1. Zach Hyman adds his 10th goal of the playoffs. Connor McDavid with 3 assists. Leon Draisaitl with 2. And now it all boils down to a Game 7 here. And which Edmonton Oilers team is going to show up? Is it going to be the team that's going to try to outscore you or try to just skate right by you and hope that you have one more goal when it's all said and done at the end of the final buzzer? Or is it going to be a game where Vancouver is going to jump out early and maybe they hold on tight and the Oilers pinch a little or try to grip the sticks a little bit too hard where they can't seem to make a play? And this is going to be front and center on not just Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. We think they'd show up, but they're going to have to carry the mail here. They're going to have to show and prove that although they weren't the favorites coming into the series to win, but they are the Edmonton Oilers. They are a team that has a plethora of big-time stars. It's time for them to show up in a big spot here in a Game 7. And if they lose badly, 5-1, and they don't contribute, then we can get on them. But if they lose 2-1 and they made some plays or had opportunities, whatever, then we can look and see and assess it at that time. But that's a game that's going to be fascinating for me. 9 o'clock tonight. There's no NBA. I don't know who's going to be watching the baseball. And front and center, the NHL with a Game 7. And how could you not? Those are the 2 best words in sports. So you know I'll be on top of that. And we'll see if Edmonton is going to survive this. And I'm rooting for them big time. I want to see them win. And if you want to talk about an NHL Final Four, right this moment, I am sure Gary Bettman and the powers that be, they are hoping and praying that Edmonton plays Dallas in a conference final. And I get it that if Vancouver wins, you'll have 1 versus 2, which is similar to the Eastern Conference where you're going to have 1 and 2 go at it. And anytime you have the top 2 seeds in any sport, whether it's the NBA, even baseball for that matter, of course you'd settle for that. But you want to have Edmonton's star power in the conference final to go along with the Dallas Stars. Because I'm sure if you put it all together, an Edmonton-New York Rangers Stanley Cup final would be enormous. Connor McDavid finally on a Stanley Cup final stage against an original 6 team, they would do backflips for that Stanley Cup final. Anything less than that, I guess if Vancouver wins tonight, you're going to have visions of 30 years ago where you could have a rematch of Vancouver and New York for a Stanley Cup final, and who knows, we could probably see that. And even though Dallas is a big market, the last Stanley Cup final they want to see is Dallas, Florida, or Vancouver, Florida. They do not want that. And I don't care if the hockey fan's going to say, well, Florida made it to the Cup final last year. For them to go back-to-back to see if they could get a shot to win a Cup final, all right, nice storyline, great, fantastic. But they need to have New York in that final. No ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. And I'm sure they'd rather have Edmonton or, dare I say, Vancouver, just for nostalgic sake. And I know my podcast, what was it, last week or 10 days ago, where I talked about smells like 94. Obviously, the Knicks are long gone. Well, I won't say long gone. I just lost yesterday. But the Knicks are going to be nowhere near final. So it's not going to smell like 94, but it would sure smell like 94 if Vancouver wins tonight and does win the Western Conference, as well as the Rangers taking care of their side of the draw, because then it's going to really smell like 94, although you're not going to have Pavel Bure, Mark Messier, etc. So let's see how it's going to shake down. Looking forward to it tonight, and we'll recap it and talk about it on Thursday's podcast. And as far as other news, great to see Craig Berube back behind a bench. Remember, he was the St. Louis Blues coach that was fired earlier this year, won a cup with the Blues back in 2019, former tough guy in the NHL, most notably early on in his career for the Flyers, did play for Toronto, so he's a former Maple Leaf, bounced around Washington, Calgary, etc. So he's going to add a lot of oomph to that locker room, toughness, no holds barred, no prisoners going to be taken here. So if there's going to be a guy that's going to take him to the mountaintop, I love that Berube is your head coach there. So is he going to be that guy? We're going to wait and see, but I thought that was a great hire. Because if Toronto's going to get to where they haven't seen in the likes of 56, 57 years, then Berube could be that guy that will take him there. So we'll keep that in mind as we get into the spring and summer, and of course next season when the Maple Leafs will get ready for training camp there in September. All right, now let me rapid fire here. I'm going to try to do this. It's going to be past an hour, people. I'm already at the 44-minute mark, approaching 45. Yesterday with the golf, you had the PGA in the books, and of course the big story is what happened there on Friday with Scottie Scheffler as I get my golf clubs. I know I didn't lace up my skates talking the NHL, but I'll break out the golf clubs and hit off the first tee. Scottie Scheffler Friday, and for him to be arrested there in the early morning hours there in Louisville, Kentucky at Valhalla, for what happened there, the bus accident where a man had died, and of course thoughts, prayers, and condolences to the family of that gentleman who perished in that accident. But for whatever the reason, the report had it that one police officer told him he had to stop here because he had to take a different detour or take a different route to the golf course, and then there was another cop behind him that he wasn't, for whatever reason, maybe didn't get his point across, where Scheffler looked like he was ready to drive away, and then the police officer got on top of the hood. Therefore, Scheffler drove off. The police officer, who suffered minor injuries, went tumbling to the ground, and then they had to arrest him before going to the precinct. An hour later was released, got to the golf course an hour prior to the start of his tee time at roughly 10:10, I think it was. So you had that going on where Scheffler didn't know what the hell was going on, what was happening, why was he arrested, and that was just a hullabaloo to say the least. But Scheffler was cool as a cucumber. He shot, I believe, a 65 there or I believe a 66. He shot a 65 there yesterday. But then on Saturday, that was the mess for him as he shot one over a 72 and was nowhere near the top of the leaderboard. And let's see what's going to happen. I believe tomorrow he has to show up there for a hearing to get even more details as to what happened here. I don't think he's going to be charged. Even he said in the post-match interview that it was a giant misunderstanding. I don't know if it was a thing where he didn't hear properly or did get the instructions from the first officer, but the second one, I don't know why that officer jumped on the top of his hood, as was reported, and then Scheffler drove off. I don't know if he panicked or didn't realize, like, oh my God, he jumped on my hood and therefore just decided to hit the gas. Who knows, but we'll see when it's all said and done after tomorrow what that hearing will be like. I don't think he's going to be arrested or pressed any charges, or charges will be pressed for Scottie Scheffler. But other than Saturday, did have a very good weekend. And of course, Friday morning, can't discount that. So Scheffler, who did win the Masters, and a lot of people thought maybe he could win the PGA. Not the case. I figured I'd get that out of the way to talk about Xander Schauffele, who was your PGA winner. And Schauffele was stupendous in his opening round. He shot a 62. Second time he's done that in his career. PGA record. And it was almost upstaged on Friday by Shane Lowry, who was also in the mix near the top of the leaderboard throughout the weekend. He was a birdie putt away from shooting a 61, which would have broken Schauffele's record there the round prior. But for Schauffele, who went into yesterday's final round with Bryson DeChambeau, Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland, and as we got through the course of the afternoon and a lot of drama built up where DeChambeau birdied on 18 to tie Xander Schauffele there and looked like a possible playoff was headed. But on the 18th hole, Schauffele, who at his first shot near the bunker, and a lot of people thought, uh-oh, maybe his second shot, who knows where that's, and that was a par 5, I might add. Who knows where that may lie, but his second shot was, of course, very good on his approach, which led to his long putt, which left him 6 feet from the cup. And at 6 feet from the cup, going for a birdie try, because if he didn't make that putt, he would have tied with DeChambeau and would have had a playoff. But he made the birdie putt right then and there. And kudos to Schauffele, who has been very close, whether it was at the Masters a few years ago or other tournaments, major tournaments that I might add, where he could have prevailed and would have finally gotten that one major on his ledger and under his belt. But yesterday or last night was able to do so. And Bryson DeChambeau, who was very complimentary in the post-match interview, saying that not only did he deserve it, but he's a great human being. He finally is not a guy that is one of the top players on the circuit where he does not have a major. And big ups to DeChambeau, because a lot of people look at him as a louse. And of course, with his rivalry in the past with Brooks Koepka. Not to say Koepka is a ball of sunshine in his own right, but for Schauffele, just a stupendous job in what he did. And yesterday, Schauffele shot, what did he shoot? I believe he shot a 65 to close out. And for Schauffele, just a stupendous job on his right and his part. And what more could you say about what he did throughout the course of the weekend? I mean, Viktor Hovland was another guy who also came to 18 looking to tie. But Hovland, who did not bogey in his prior 41 holes, but saved his worst for last as he was ready for a birdie putt there at 18. He missed that. I forgot how many feet it was. I got to see how far that shot was. But he missed that, and then he had a 3-foot putback, which he missed, which obviously missing that birdie putt, he wouldn't have tied with DeChambeau or Schauffele for the lead. And for Hovland, who had it right there, just let that slip away. But for Schauffele, give it up. Just a great job throughout the whole weekend, from the opening round to how he closed. And for him getting his first major, I'm sure that was an achievement that not only remarkable in his own right, but for him to get that piano off his back, I'm sure it's a relief. I'm sure he's ecstatic. And now let's see, as we head to the U.S. Open next month, if he could generate more momentum and his confidence is, we all know, sky high to get to the third major during the Father's Day weekend. And then for a couple of other guys, Tiger missed the cut, shot a 77 there on Friday. He was 1 over on Thursday and was just bad there with 2 triple bogeys on Friday, missing the cut. Tiger, as we talked about before, whether it's his body and how it's just betrayed him, how he's unable to get his game together, and I'm sure his body has a lot to do with that, with his swing, walking the course, knees, ankles, etc. I think the days of Tiger being near or at the top of a leaderboard, forget about few and far between. I think they are slim and none. But that's not breaking any news, and that's not a knock on Tiger. Father Time seems to have caught up to him. So that's number one. And then Rory, who shot well and was tied for 12th, won on Friday, had a 71, which was par for the day. I believe what he shot, a 68, 67. He had put up great scores throughout the weekend. But this course, which maybe if I would have shot on that course, who knows? Maybe I would have shot a few strokes over par at 74, 75, etc. Of course, I'm kidding when I say that, but he had a lot of big-time scores, as we saw, record-breaking scores, whether with Schauffele, almost with Shane Lowry, a bunch of players shooting in the mid-60s. As I mentioned, Scheffler shot a 65 there yesterday to close out his round, on top of that 66 that he shot there on Friday. So a lot of players shot well under throughout the course of the tournament, and not only that, but throughout the various rounds over the weekend. So to me, Valhalla in Louisville was a playground for these players on the tour, as you saw throughout the 4-day stretch. And let's see, as the PGA, like I said, is on deck for next month. But a very good tournament. I understand the Scheffler news superseded a lot of that, but here we are now at the closing. A lot better this tournament, the PGA, than we saw at the Masters, where there was no drama, no intrigue. And of course, we saw that there yesterday, as we mentioned there, between DeChambeau, Viktor Hovland, who fell off there at the end, but then Schauffele having to make a big shot to avoid a playoff, which set up the stage for a thrilling ending and a good conclusion to the PGA Championship. All right, now let me get to some Major League Baseball. There is a few things to discuss here. And the first thing right off the bat are the New York Yankees, because the Yankees have the best record in the AL, 33-15, although they are tied and have 4 games over the Baltimore Orioles, because the Orioles have 4 games in hand on the Yankees. As I get into the batter's box to take a couple of hacks here. Now, the Yankees, I get it. They've played an underbelly of a schedule here over the last week. They've won 7 in a row. They swept the Twins in Minnesota, which they normally do, notwithstanding last year, as the Twins won the season series for the first time in forever. But they swept the White Sox, no big deal. They have the Mariners coming in for 4 this week. All right, a little bit better competition as Seattle invades the Bronx for the next 4 days. But the Yankees, 33-15. The Phillies have the best record in the sport, a game ahead of them at 34-14. But the Yankees, are they the AL's best team as of right this second? Even with the Orioles neck and neck with them in the AL East? Right now you have to say so. And think about this, Yankee fans. No Garrett Cole. No DJ LeMahieu. You have Luis Hill, who is acting like Garrett Cole in the rotation. Had 14 strikeouts there on Saturday against the White Sox, a Yankee rookie record, and he is just plugged into the rotation nicely. Their bullpen has been lights out. Clay Holmes, their closer, has not given up an earned run, acting like Mariano 2.0. Although in a big spot, I don't trust him. And a lot for that bullpen even overall. It's May. I don't want to throw cold water. I'm not going to do that, although I do have one caveat, which I have to bring up to the Yankee fan at the tail end of my little assessment here. But seriously, in all seriousness, even putting my Yankee hate aside, Judge is all of a sudden hot as a rail or hot as a pistol, where after he got ejected in that game a couple of weeks ago, the guy's hitting home runs left and right, east, west, north, and south, all over the place. Stanton, who, of course, he's also picked up his game as well. Gleyber Torres, you'd like to see him perform a little bit better, but the Yankee offense surrounding by Juan Soto, who, as you read the other day, is open with Hal Steinbrenner for some in-season negotiations on a contract. And that's something. Knowing that the Yankees may have a deal at some point where they can hammer it out sometime before the All-Star break, or maybe we would think you would wait until the All-Star break until any news would come forth at that time. But just knowing that they're going to negotiate, which is not in any organization, let alone the Yankees, as a distraction toward player, team, representation, etc. So that's a good thing for the Yankees to see if they could somehow, some way pull out a deal throughout the course of this 162-game season. And we know what Soto and what his presence in the lineup has meant. And for the Yankees, what more can I say? They have been phenomenal here throughout this first 18-game stretch. I know they had a little bit of a hiccup there in the middle part of that where they lost a couple of series, but they have not skipped a beat since, and they have been arguably the best team in the sport. I understand the people 90 miles south of Philadelphia will have a thing or two to say about that, but everything that I mentioned, no Cole, no LeMahieu, their bullpen has been hot. Aaron Judge has been hotter. And what more can you say? Luis Hill, he's acting like Garrett Cole 2.0 and Clay Holmes and what he's done. And their bullpen, I know Caleb Ferguson had that one hiccup there last week, but still, they've been fantastic. Nothing more I can add. But the one thing I will say, and there's a caveat, people, I'm not throwing cold water. I'm just going to throw out a little scenario for the Yankee fan. And this is, I guess, a segment I could call Reels Receipts. Just keep this for somewhere down the line, more so in October than right now. Just remember this, people. You can have a big regular season. You can win a division. Let's say you do so and you're a top 2 seed. And you go on, and I don't know which team you're going to play. And mind you, the American League is not like the National League. It's not as if the Braves of last year are going to have these Phillies waiting for them in the division series. Or dare I even say the Dodgers, and they won 105 games or whatever it was last year, and they had the Arizona Diamondbacks, who they were 20 games better in the standings and in their division, have to face them in the first round. What happened to the Braves and the Dodgers last year in the division series? Combine the wins for both teams, 1 win. And that was a Game 2 win by the Braves in the division series. Because if you recall, the Diamondbacks swept the Dodgers. All right, so now that I paint that picture, what happens at the Yankees? And let's say they play a team like the Seattle Mariners or even the Texas Rangers in the division series, and they get swept. I'm sure you remember who your manager is, Aaron Boone, and right now everything is smelling like roses. It's all coconuts and palm trees in the Bronx. But your manager is Aaron Boone, and he can have a big-time regular season and be a top 2 seed in the American League. What if they spit the bit in the division series where Aaron Judge doesn't hit? Soto, he may have a million walks and may have a couple of home runs, but he's been the offense. Stanton, who knows what's going to happen to him come postseason. Garrett Cole, he's been prone to not having big-time playoff games for the Yankees. Check the back of his baseball card. And the bullpen, again, Clay Holmes, you trust him holding a 4-3 lead where you're going to have Adolis Garcia, Corey Seager, and Marcus Semien coming up the plate there in the top of the 9th inning? Or are you going to be, your gut's going to tell you that, oh yeah, he's going to come out of this 1-2-3 in the 9th inning? I have to see it to believe it. So remember, he is your manager, people. So although everything's all well and good at this present moment, and it's not all on him because we know that that's a collective effort with the front office, Brian Cashman, etc. But one more time, he is your manager. And if he does not come out of the division series, or let's say get to a World Series, because let's say if they don't do well in the ALCS, which has happened in 2019 and has happened in 2022, where he couldn't beat the Astros, as we all know, does he come back as a lame duck manager going into this final year of his contract? Mull that over here for the next 4 or 5 months before we get to October, because that is a story that's going to be fascinating, to say the least, if he does not get out of the division series or even the championship series alive. Other than that, the Astros, speaking of them, 9-2 in their last 11. They're starting to creep up the standings, which who knows if that's going to bode well. They have the Angels coming in this weekend after sweeping the A's last week and beating the Brewers 2 out of 3 over the weekend. So for the Astros, let's see what they're going to have in store, as they're what now? Let me see. 4 games back of the Mariners for the top spot. And I said that they weren't going to make it to the postseason. So, and they still have work to do. They're still 5 games under, but because the AL is very weak in their division, I mean, think about this. The Angels at 18-29, and we know they're going nowhere fast. They are 7 games behind in the AL West. And just to put that in perspective, the Red Sox, who right now are a game under, so I guess I can't even put them in the mix, they're 9 back in the division. Or even a team like, you want to say, the Mets, for the Met fan like myself, yours truly, who had a nightmare of a weekend, even though they salvaged their series against the Marlins. They are 12 back behind the Phillies. So, to me, they're in striking distance in comparison to those other teams that you would think would be part of the mix, Red Sox, even Mets, as far as the wild card, or maybe for the division. Yeah, joke's on me when it comes to that. So the Angels have a better shot of winning a division at this juncture right now, although we know in the grand scheme of things they don't. But that just gives you an idea. And then Paul Skenes, second Major League start. All he did against the Cubs, second time he's faced them, because remember, he faced them the weekend before. 6 innings, no runs, 1 walk, no hits, and 11 strikeouts. How about that for your second debut? Second Major League start, which of course is going to beg the question, is he Major League Baseball's next phenom? Well, we can't say after 2 starts, but certainly in his first start, he threw what? Over 100 miles an hour in 17 of his pitches. Didn't make it out of the 5th inning. I'm sure they were protecting his arm, but he got into this pitch 6 innings and gave you his stat line. So yes, maybe now he'll really start to take off to show Major League Baseball and the sports world the type of pitcher that he can be. And very small sample size, but certainly very impressive in his last start against the Cubs. But besides that, now the Yankees, like I mentioned, first place, 2 games over the Orioles, although the Orioles have 4 games in hand, so you got to keep that in mind. And then when we look throughout the rest, Guardians, who the Mets go play, by the way, and the return of Francisco Lindor, first time gracing the Progressive Field, I was going to say Jacobs Field, Progressive Field for the first time since he was traded back in January 2021. So let's see how the Mets fare in Cleveland. Over the weekend, the Twins have now all of a sudden hit the abutment. Not only did they get swept by the Yankees, as I mentioned a little while ago, but they also got swept by the Guardians over the weekend. So you talk about coming back, crashing down to earth after that 12-game winning streak that they had, if you recall, a couple weeks back. Well, that's a thing of the distant past. And then National League, Phillies, who have a 5-game lead, but it's 2 in the loss, so you got to take that with a grain of salt, because the Braves have 6 games in hand on the Phillies. I guess all the rainouts and things of that nature. So although you can look at, wow, they have a 5-game lead in the division, but 6 games in hand, so you have to account for that. And the Braves over the weekend, they got swept in their own right by the Padres. So the Padres, who one of the games were, there's an instance there where the rain affected that series. So we have that to look at. when it comes to the Braves and the Padres, for that matter. Let's see where they stand. They're at 500. So for San Diego, very good job. One of the games had to be postponed. I'm sure there's going to be a makeup day at some point. And matter of fact, it's going to be this afternoon because it would have been an off day. So let's see if they can complete the sweep as the Padres look to lay the hammer down on the Braves here this afternoon. But other than that, nothing much else to really get into. Dodgers have a 7-game lead in the division, so they're going to go running away, you would think, when it's all said and done. And as far as the schedule, real quick for baseball, we talked about that Braves-Padres to wrap it up. And as a matter of fact, they're playing a double dip because is that a wraparound series? I guess it was. I guess originally they're playing a 12-20 game, but then they're also going to play a night game to see if they can make up the game from the rainout on Saturday. Then San Diego goes to Cincinnati. We talked about Mets in Cleveland. Yankees, Seattle, we talked about. Boston at Tampa. Texas at Philadelphia. Interesting series there. Baltimore, St. Louis. Detroit, Kansas City. Arizona at LA. There's a rematch there of the division series as we talked about there earlier. White Sox at Toronto. There's your series for the week. Nothing really to get crazy about. I know Texas, Philly may be sexy. Defending champs going up against the Phils. But that's what you have there with baseball. Now, let me wrap up with a couple other things before I bid adieu. And Lord knows I'm already well past the hour mark. But obviously, I got to discuss what's happening in these other two sports. The Preakness, what we saw there on Saturday. Mystik Dan in a field of 8 horses. Not a lot, but at least he showed up and didn't show out. He was in second place behind the front runner who saved the day, and that Seized the Gray was your winner there as you came up the home stretch, and it was pretty much Seized the day from the start. Did not relinquish the lead, but as you saw, Mystik Dan trying to get that last push to see if they could get neck and neck, nose and nose. Certainly was not a photo finish what we saw there at the Kentucky Derby, but nevertheless, try to make it close and at least showed some respect on some sloppy conditions there. As you saw, the track there was just muddy as Mystik Dan did put forth a good race and unfortunately did come in second. So you're going to have zero intrigue, zero buzz going into the Belmont Stakes, which would be 3 weeks from this past Saturday. So he gave it a go, gave it a shot. Now we'll see with the Belmont, all of the horses come out, especially the ones who participate in the Derby. Maybe Fierceness could erase the embarrassment of being up the track there a couple of Saturdays ago, as I'm sure you'll probably see Fierceness race in the Belmont, but we'll wait and see, and we'll talk about that a couple of Thursdays from now. But that's what you have there with the Preakness is, again, came down to the wire, Seized the Gray, seized the day, and now we could pretty much forget horse racing for the rest of the year, although I will talk about the Belmont as we get closer to that. And as far as boxing, I got to talk about this. This is brief, but did anybody watch Tyson Fury with Oleksandr Usyk? I didn't see that. I did see the knockdown there where Fury was pretty much in a daze based on what Usyk did, and now Usyk has the heavyweight title. Of course, boxing, as I mentioned time after time, a far cry and a shell of its old self. And it was a split decision there. And I'm sure Fury, he's going to want a rematch. And Fury thought that he won the fight, even though he got knocked down there. And it wasn't a brutal knockdown. It was more of Usyk just getting a couple of punches in there where Fury was dazed and he was up against the ropes. And then he did go down, but didn't go down in a heap of bricks. But for what's that worth, I don't know, because the heavyweight title doesn't mean anything close to what it did 20, 30, obviously 40 years ago. But you have Usyk is now your heavyweight champ. So for what that's worth, we'll see what's going to happen there down the road. And then one sad note I have to throw in the NFL. Jim Otto, the longtime center dating back to the AFL days of the Raiders in the 60s. Their opening game back in 1960 was the man at center, the 00 that he had. Played 15 years in the league. One of the top 100 players of all time in the sport. Obviously, a fixture there under center, whether your name was George Blanda, whether your name was Darryl LaMonica, whether your name was Kenny Stabler in the latter part of that era. And, of course, when the AFL and NFL emerged, those early 70s Steeler Raider rivalries, those teams that Otto was the man at center. And of course, his story, even during his playing days and post days, was all those surgeries that he had to endure, especially on his knees, and had to have his leg amputated because of infections of those said surgeries, and was a poster boy for a guy that if anyone needed help in his post-playing days as far as having any medical assistance or medical insurance, because of him being that warrior that he was on the field for all those years in the black and silver. And unfortunately, yesterday, passed at the age of 86 and had to have his leg amputated because of all those surgeries and the infection that he got in one of his legs where they had to amputate. So I'm sure, as tough as he was on the football field, he was surely tough in life and had to endure all that his post-NFL playing days. And I'm sure it had to be just brutal to have to deal with painkillers and surgeries and visits and rehab and man, and the good soldier that he was to fight the battle that he fought on the field and off. Nothing but respect to you as you transition at the age of 86. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Otto family, the Raider family, the NFL for just being anything and everything that you can imagine. A quintessential football player who literally left everything on the field and for the most part, off. Age of 86. One more time, thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out to you, sir, and your family. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode, jam-packed, I know. All in one episode, all those sports. Where else are you going to get that? I don't know. I'm listening. I'm waiting. And even if there is, that's fine because this is your source for all the sauce in the world of sports. Yours truly, the J Reels Podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious moments out of your day to listen to what it is that I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars, write a review like I mentioned at the top. On all of my platforms, on my YouTube channel, at JReels. I know the other day I mentioned about a vlog that I've been, hopefully was going to post yesterday, but again, learning this new editing platform. I'll keep you posted on my YouTube channel, as well as any of my social media feeds. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: on YouTube at JReels, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just a number, or the old-fashioned way, the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. I'll give you an update as to when the vlog will come out. With the Lord's will, it should be in the coming days. Hopefully it'll be before Thursday's podcast, and if it is, I'll let you know on any of my platforms, and of course here on the podcast, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I always like to say, since birth, since I've come out of the womb, with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the J-Reels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J-Reels Podcast, on the flip, baby.